So, another reflection on the question whether the first cave is in the second cave. So, if we ask the question whether the first cave is the place where a kind of phyllodoxy is in, let's say, something like absolute control, tyrannical control, such that if somebody comes down from the outside world who's tasted the knowledge of the sun, and they come back into the tyrannical order of opinion or phyllodoxy, which I can't help but observe in some way reminds of the Straussian criticism of the Epicureanism, so far as there is such a thing as the Straussian criticism of Epicureanism. Would the total control of opinion rather than what's gained from the sunlight be how we understand the shadow world of the doxa? Already doxa is taking on specific characteristics which do not obtain if we begin, for instance, under the notion that there's some talk amongst people in the political situation, and there's some things they're talking about. So, for instance, they're saying we hear a kind of a tinkle of a sort of a guitar which says you can have your own opinions but not your own facts. So that's one of the sayings that we might challenge in the current public world where things are being said and we want to know what all the talk is about. If the word opinion is spoken in that same sphere, surely it doesn't first and foremost mean that which I alluded to in a sort of a little outline sketch, a profile in the beginning of this recording. It's not the assumption of the realm of the shadows or doxa as over and against the sun, where you can get the light of the truth, and presumably this truth is, at least with Plato, Socrates, still generally taken, not assumed to be, but taken to be, after some discussion, to be identical with knowledge or science. Knowledge, science, and Sophia, wisdom, so episteme, or some form of the knowledge that is tied to mathematicos, and also the higher forms linked to nous, Sophia, or wisdom, are generally taken to be the same in this. When Socrates gets into a discussion on that, he discusses it, but he usually concludes they're probably the same. He doesn't just. Maybe there are some places where he makes distinctions. Later on, Aristotle makes many distinctions. But the specific way these two kinds of truths are laid out is, for us, we understand it, and perhaps it's a kind of dangerous Nietzschean thing. So, like, we understand it that Socrates has made this great break, and he's the first, according to Nietzsche, the first theoretical man. But the other way to put that is he's the first who proposed that the human being is radically different than everything else that exists, so that it has a sphere which becomes the eternity in the Christian thinking, which allows the Christians to set themselves off against the pagans and also against the pre-Socratic Greeks. You can say the early Greeks, what they said is something like, whether or not they understood themselves as making an analogy, I'm not exactly sure. Understanding as analogizing the notion that the world may be water or the world may be a stone is to think of the water or the stone as a living thing, and then as coming into different forms, and then to have a notion, along with Parmenides' idea, the one of a universe. So everything is rolled into one, and the way it's rolled into one is that it's alive. So if we went, for instance, if we understood by analogy a kind of measuring by how far we can throw the hoop of likeness, so I find something that I can throw over a tree, namely the notion of life. But so, like, it's a sign that a tree is alive, that clustered around the edges of its branches are healthy-looking leaves. But that's not a sign that a human being is alive. If you see healthy-looking leaves clustered around the edges of the branches of a human being, that's not a sign that it's alive. So it's just a sign. It doesn't tell us for sure. Maybe the tree is actually dead. But likewise, you could throw that farther and then think, oh, we know that a stone is alive as long as it's doing what a stone wants to do, which is to fall down. If you kind of shave the stone down and it becomes dust and starts floating around in the air, it's no longer alive, because a stone wouldn't do that. A stone doesn't gust up in the air and float away. And that's not what stones, when they're alive, they fall. That's what being alive for a stone means. So you could see how you could extend through analogy life throw it onto other things. Something like this is behind the notion that there were pagans and pagan thinking, and they always remained within the world. And then there was this break, which Nietzsche turns into a myth in his in the beginning of Truth and Lies in an Extramoral Sense, in the famous first paragraph. So that most mendacious and arrogant of moments in quote unquote world history, when Socrates did he invent knowledge? When Socrates invented knowledge, was it a technological object, or now do we have to say he created knowledge? So when we come into the particulars of what was being thought, we can see already there's some difficulties in knowing if we interpret correctly, and if we want any detail in understanding what the cave metaphor meant, then although it's gratifying to say the standard thing, and I've often said it, that the cave means this motion from the opinions, the jibber-jabber, to knowledge. Yes, but then as soon as we go beyond our current cave, as it were, what strikes us as the immediate meaning of these knowledge and the immediate meaning of opinion, especially we just went through opinion. Opinion is not really doxa, especially as picked up and discussed by Socrates, Plato, means something quite different than what we mean when we say uh, everyone's allowed to have their own opinions, but not their own facts. There was no term that was the same thing as facts for the Greeks. Um, but that to be, even that being said, is misleading, because when I say that, what I was thinking of is this technical meaning of facts rather than values laid down in a few different places, which you have to go to Albert Brecht or to someone who said that in a clear way, to Simmel, or to some current analytical philosopher. Then we can see the technical meaning. But what fact means exactly as it floats around in the cave of opinions as we now understand it is not so obvious. And then depending on who's controlling the production of dictionaries, you clearly get different views on that. So to end this, I'll just say one good yoga would be to go to dictionaries from about 100 years ago. So like there's plenty of Webster's dictionaries in universities anyways to keep them around, often public libraries keep them around, from about 1920, good old Webster's dictionary, and look up a few terms such as the term concept, and then see how the current usage differs. Often one will come to see that in a time when the questions which were regarded as serious pointed in a different direction, so pointed more towards philosophy, there will be a corresponding seriousness in the entries for philosophic terms in the ordinary collegiate dictionary. And one can see likewise that in our own time, when people like Steven Pinker often sit on the boards that decide on usage and the right definitions of words, we get a somewhat different scant